Hey, welcome to another episode of Just Say It. I'm Matt. I'm here with Chase as usual. No guests. And I'm actually back. I think, Chase, you did the last podcast alone.
Yes. I hope it went well.
Were you lonely?
No, not at all.
Oh,
I've gotten used to speaking
sad.
to a camera. During COVID, it really broke any kind of inhibition I had about looking into a camera in an empty room.
I mean, I was just really hoping that you would say, I really missed you, Matt, and I wanted you back here, but it's okay.
I'm glad you're back.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. So today, before we get into the episode, just want to make sure that you know and you are aware that coming up this summer, August 1st and 2nd, I believe, is our second Burn the Ships men's conference. And so we want to make sure that you knew about that you are invited. All men, you're invited, and invite your friends. It's going to be a great time. We've got some awesome stuff going on. We've got Michael Clary from Christ the King Church in Cincinnati. We have Michael Foster from, he's in Batavia, Ohio. I know where that is. Most people don't, but sorry, Michael. And then we've got the Dr. Doug Ponder from Grimke Seminary coming out to speak, and you're going to get a little bit of Chase and myself as well. On top of that, we're actually going to be having a concert on the opening night. We found this great guy who does awesome country music from down in Texas. He's going to come up, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So get your tickets. There is a point when they go up in price, and that's coming up soon. Hopefully, I'm saying this before the next podcast comes out. I'm not sure. Regardless, it's a good deal. And so you can go on our website, boulderwell.org, and you can find the Burn the Ships link on there, and you can purchase your tickets. So go ahead and do that. If you're a college student, message us. There's a discount code for that. Children are free if you want to bring your sons. That would be great. And any other, group discounts as well. Just shoot us a message and we have that. So if you're bringing a bunch of people from your church, let us know. We have a group discount available for that. All right. So let's dive into the topic. Today, we're talking about our residency program so that we can make doctors, right? No, church planters.
Yes.
So let's just kind of start in general, maybe going back a little bit and going very simply, like what is a residency? And then we can get into why did we decide to do one? What's the purpose of it? All that kind of stuff. So Chase, if you want to chat for a minute about what is a residency in the kind of church world for church planting?
Yeah, so let's define some terms. So church planting, if you're in our church, you're familiar with this concept. If you're not in our church or you try to explain to other people who are not familiar with the church world and you say church plant, they're going to be very confused by you. So when we talk about church planting, we're talking about starting new churches. That's what we're talking about. And as of the last 30 years, there has been a lot of energy around church planting.
Yep.
Church planting isn't new. I don't know if the concept is new or the semantic church plant is new, but churches have been started all throughout the world. How they get started is a very fascinating discussion that we won't get into, I don't think, in this episode.
You never know.
You never know. But there's lots of ways that a church plant can start, whether it's like us, which was what they call in the industry, to use that language, would be a parachute plant. Some people call it that. So that's where you enter a new context, new city, new country, whatever it is, and you don't know anyone there. And you're starting a new work, a new church, where one either doesn't exist or a few churches exist, or maybe lots of churches exist and you just have a different approach. Maybe you are coming from a different denominational background or church confession or something like that. And so that's what we're talking about with church planting. But ours was a parachute plant. There's other models which can be like you have a mission church. So you'll see this with some churches that get off the ground. The church planter already lives in that town or area. He already has kind of a core team established, and he is supported by either what they call a mother church or ascending church. These are all common terminology. And then you'll get, we're kind of zeroing in on residency programs, but you'll get church planting organizations that offer credentialing for either model, for the church plant or kind of mission church model. And these church plant organizations range from the Association of Related Churches, ARC, North American Mission Board, NAM, and they have a program called SEND. They all have acronyms, sorry. It's like the government.
So much lingo, man.
So much lingo. So it's very insider stuff. And then you'll get church plant residencies, and these can either be tied to the kind of network, whether it's denominational or non-denominational, or they'll be tied to a local church. And so Matt went through a residency program at Fellowship Bible Church called Fellowship Associates. That was the name of their church planting residency. So to get to your original question, with residencies, what are we talking about? We're talking about a particular season of training that's kind of like a finishing school for a aspiring church planter to get more training and equipping on what it looks like to start a church. Here in Boulder, the term we might use, since we have startups in our town and we have these things in our town called incubators. So this is where someone with a startup idea, someone that wants to start either launch a new product, a new service, a new business, will go through a program, get networked, perhaps get funding, get training, get feedback on their product, new ventures, and that's like a year or so, and then they'll launch their business or do something like that. It's a similar concept. Or if you think of like a doctor attending a residency program, they'll go and have a residency program. I'm going to speak way out of my league here because I think, as far as I know, a residency program is like you're kind of being supervised and mentored as you like have finished med school. Now you're doing residency and you're actually doing the work of a doctor, but you're in a residency program. Yeah. And so that's kind of what it looks like. But Matt, do you want to provide any more on that?
Yeah, it's funny. I was in a residency program, and I was in a great one, one that I love and appreciate still to this day. Served our church really well. What I would say, I remember I got to my residency, and I was so young and so naive on so many levels, but I knew I wanted to plant a church. I knew I needed help. And I remember I got to my residency, and I asked them, what is this? What did I sign up for? And I moved to Little Rock, Arkansas to do it. And I had a 3-week-old, and I moved my family from Colorado to there to live there for about 10, 11 months. So you'd think that these would be questions that one would ask before they would go, but I did not. I just saw opportunity and I took it. But I got there, I was like, so what is this? And what is a residency? And there was a lot of things, but one of the ways that they kind of shaped it for me and told me was like, it's usually not a good idea for a man who has a desire to plant a church just to have that desire and run on that alone. And you can look back and you think, well, where is this biblically? You could point to obviously, I don't think it was called a residency or anything like that, but the original church planter, you might say, is Paul, right? He gets saved, and everybody thinks, oh, then he just started all his ministry. No, there was a time period where he was kind of away. He was with the Christians of the time learning and studying and doing all sorts of things. We don't know at all what he did, but you might call that some form of training to go forward into it. Now, that's taking some liberties. I understand that fully. But the point is that it's good to have a time set aside where you're with people that have already done what you hope to do. And so that's the main goal there. Some of them are going to be more theologically oriented. And what I mean by that is they're going to be like, we're going to get you up to snuff theologically. Maybe you don't have a seminary background, or you need a little bit of work on just kind of developing your theological acumen. And so they'll do that. Most of them are going to be more on the practical side. They're going to be more the how-tos, the nuts and bolts of it. And like everything, you can get ones that it's crazy. It's kind of like going to a business school. I'm not as big of a fan of that. I think there should be a cross-pollination between the nuts and bolts, the theological, focusing on the preaching and how you preach. Like I know I had to have my sermons reviewed by the people, and they would kind of help me craft a sermon. How to craft a sermon was something I did. I'd been preaching for a while, but that was really helpful. How to build a team and that sort of thing. And so that's what I would say, just adding on to what you said about what a residency is. Yeah, and I think another way to think of it for different industries might be like, if you want to become a plumber or an electrician, you do an apprenticeship for a little while. It's kind of like an internship, but interns are typically, someone who comes to the church for a short season to help the church in a specific area. And this is more with the intentionality of this person becoming their own pastor or becoming a pastor of their own. Yeah. And so those are maybe some helpful analogies for you to kind of get your mind around what a residency program is. So we started a residency program 10 years ago. Yeah. And it was, I think that's right, 2015. When we started the Well Church, we planted with the aspiration to plant other churches. This was
big in kind of the waters we were swimming in. We want to plant churches that plant churches. That was kind of the idea. I think it's a cool vision still, that, one church would grow to a point where they would send out another church plant. And you'll see different metrics for this, particularly from the background we come from, which is, once you reach a certain size, you should be sending out people. You shouldn't grow past a certain thing, and the church has to decide that for themselves, whether it's like 300 people, 1,000 people, whatever it may be. And then they basically go, hey, we're starting a new work an hour away. We want to invite 50 people to go join that, and that kind of thing. So the residency program, like Matt said, will typically take on kind of the flavor of the local church. If it's a church-based residency, unless it's like a, parachurch-based residency, like an ARC or something like that. There's so many. Do you know of any others? Can you think of any others besides the ones I mentioned? ARC, Send Network. I mean, Acts 29 would be one. What's another one?
You're not supposed to say that name.
Oh,
it's like Baltimore.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, if you think of a denomination, they probably have some form of it.
Yeah, like PCA has one.
Yeah.
So yeah, a lot of them have that. So we wanted to talk about our residency because we wanted to kind of have an evergreen episode for our church to kind of know about some of the work we do as your pastors to kind of raise up other church planters. And we wanted to kind of go through the history of how we've planted churches, maybe things that have changed, things that have stayed the same. So why don't we talk through kind of the original reason we started a residency and what it looked like when we started it?
Yeah, I think we started a residency for a couple of reasons. One, we think church planting is a biblical and good thing. I think every good biblical church would say that. And two, I had such a great experience in mind that I was like, this is a really helpful tool. And when we kind of looked at the landscape and, it's not that there aren't already things there, but we're planting in Colorado in a unique context. All of the interesting things that make kind of the West in general unique, the western part of the United States. We said, man, it would be really great if there was something that we could help called men in that journey of planting a church. And we think as we've learned some lessons, we've been through a residency, seminary, all that kind of stuff. It's not that we have all of the answers. I think we can be really helpful to guys that want to go through this. And so, you can't forget this one too. We look around even in Boulder and we're like, we need a lot more churches. That was the other reason. And a lot of guys aren't going to move across the country. A lot of it's become, online and things like that now. But, a lot of guys are like, kind of like, I want to do a residency where I want to plant. And so we're like, well, if we want more churches in Boulder County on the Front Range of Colorado and the state of Colorado as a whole, then maybe there should be one here. Not that there isn't other ones, but that for our kind of style and brand of church that we have, that we thought that would be a good move to launch one. And it's just, I think it's a good thing for our church to see us. We want to grow, we want to do these things, but we also want to send. We want to equip people. We want to send them out with great churches. We want to do these sorts of things. And so there was a big push there. I also think we had some naivety behind church planting. We just thought like, hey, we've always heard, like you'll hear stories about like every church we planted, we sent away like 100 people, and within a month, 400 new people came into our church.
Right.
And we're like, oh, that's cool. And that didn't happen for us. That wasn't the case at all. But I think there is something good that is there. And so we wanted to do that.
Yeah, and I think to go back to one thing you mentioned, we do see biblical permission. It's not necessarily a mandate that we have to start new churches. No. We see it as an opportunity available to us in the Scripture to start new churches. Now, you could do the model of Paul, where you basically, like Matt moves to Boulder for 5 years, starts a church, raises up elders, moves on to another town. We didn't choose the model of Paul. You'll see some church planters that do that, kind of serial church planters. But it does butt up against some trends, some kind of cultural realities that people have questions about. So one would be, why not just do church revitalization? That's another phrase that you'll hear in kind of our vocation. Church revitalization is taking a church that's an otherwise good church. It's not apostate necessarily, but they need to kind of replant essentially, right? And so that's one. The other model, which some people are curious to explore. I think it's a fascinating thought experiment, at least, is kind of this attitude of reconquista, where we take over liberal churches or liberal dying churches, because there's a lot of those. They're very small. They have an older population, some of whom are probably Christians, but have been very captured by liberal theology. And so how do we enter into those places, even as members or something like that? Because they typically have the properties in towns and that kind of thing.
Yep.
And so what would it look like to practice revitalization, but more recapturing what was lost, regaining ground that was lost to the enemy in many cases. And so we have a good friend named Mark Halleck that does a lot of revitalization work in Denver. Highly recommend you go check him out, the Calvary Family of Churches. And that's a particular emphasis he has. We're definitely not opposed to that. We think it's a great effort. It's always funny because we'll discover like, oh, they're doing a revitalization work in Boulder County, and we didn't know, and it's not because of any, and they were trying to hide anything or anything like that. It was just like they're doing so many of these at this point that they can't give necessarily notice, or like we can't celebrate alongside with them. And so, like Matt said, when we started the residency, we knew we wanted to have our particular emphases. Like if we're going to send out church planners, we wanted to really emphasize a few things. And I think one of those things was kind of taking a personal inventory of the church planter, which I think is a unique thing that we offer that other church plant residencies may not offer. Like you said, some are more like a seminary type theological specificity. Some will go really hard on like the mandate of church planting, or like try to give the church planter like a theological backbone about it. And then others will go into the pragmatics. Here's how you launch your first Sunday. Here's how you invite. Here's your Facebook strategy. Here's your marketing. Here's how you raise money.
If they're recommending a Facebook strategy, you're in an outdated church planting residency.
It's true. But we decided to really emphasize for us more of the personal kind of like development of the pastor, because we think the church, while Christ is head of every church, true gospel preaching church, the health of that church, the viability of that church typically rises or falls based on the capacities, the integrity, and the competencies of that either planter or the planting team around him. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think it's important, and I know a lot of people aren't going to like what I'm probably going to say next, but, people don't, I've heard it put this way, people don't follow we, they follow a me. Like you do have to have kind of a head that's going to be driving that. Now, that's not to say we're not teaching and trying to equip and surround them with great people. We were unique. We planted as a team together and a lot of shared. But when we did start, it was like I was kind of the head at first, and then we worked up to kind of sharing equal kind of responsibilities and things like that. But it is important to identify the man and help the man understand what he's doing. One of the things I like to tell church planters, I think it's really good for people in our church and other churches to know this, is what I think is unique about our residency is I tell these guys, I go, I want you to plant a church that is all of the things that we'd expect theologically. If you're with us, we kind of know those things, right? You wouldn't have been accepted into the residency without being, reformed in your soteriology and things like that, right? We understand all of that, but I say, how do we help you plant a church that you still like in 10 years? Because statistically what we see is a lot of pastors want to quit, and they don't like their church. And it's actually become a joke. We've joked about it before and things like that. But I really do love the church that I'm in and that I'm pastoring. And as a shepherd, you should love your sheep. You should love what you're doing. And I think a lot of guys are kind of planting a church maybe out of some, what would be the right way of putting it?
Insecurity,
the reasons behind it. Like we'll ask guys, why do you want to plant a church? And they'll give us all the reasons, like we want to reach people for Jesus, we want to disciple the nations, all that. I'm like, yes, and every church planter ever. Why do you want to plant a church? And they're like, I don't know. And I'm like, well, we should probably figure that out.
Right.
And so there's motivations that we have that are kind of behind the curtain, if you will, of why people want to plant a church. And those can be good, those can be bad. Some of them just need to be redeemed a little bit and understood better. And so we want guys, when they're in our residency, to come out of it really having a high level of awareness around their motivations, their intentions, and honestly where they're going with this church.
Yeah, and I think it's not enough if a church planter, and this is from our background, what we heard a lot, this was commonly said, that the main reason you plant a church is to see more souls saved. And I would like to debunk that a bit.
Yeah.
Because I try not to go too hard against that instinct. I think it's a good instinct for all Christians to want their family, their friends, their neighbors to know the love of Jesus Christ. Yes. Absolutely, that's admirable. But when we make the starting point of our church plant, this is what you hear all the time with church planters, is there's like a famous sociologist's name, I think his name is C. Peter Wagner. He is actually connected with some really suspicious characters, but that's a topic for another day, is that we want to make sure that we don't just prioritize the lost. Because what happens when you start with that aspiration, that our church exists to see the lost saved, and you make the lost the guiding principle or the guiding audience of that church plant, boy, that goes south real fast. Because let's say you plant in a place where maybe the lost aren't getting saved as much. Your whole church plant strategy is based on reaching lost people. And so I've even heard from stages, talks, past church planters say, I don't like being around Christians. I don't want to spend more time in the church. And they'll even go so far as to produce a new law, unintentionally or intentionally. They're saying, if you're not devoting 20, 30% of your time, some made-up number, to reaching the lost, to spending time with lost people, you're failing as a pastor. And
It's crazy, man.
I found that very confusing. I mean, it has a certain, it connects to certain Christians who have a great desire to see the lost saved. And so it's very motivational. It's kind of like David Platt's Radical. It's like, it's touching something in evangelicalism that's very easy to get people riled up about. But I think it misplaces why we plant churches. We ultimately, as church planters, are pastors. We are pastors that have started a new church, and therefore, guess who we're going to be ministering to and shepherding and preaching and leading? Christians. You will have Christians that you're primarily ministering to. Will you encounter the lost? Do you want to see the lost saved? Or maybe you have evangelistic gifting? Great. But you will become a pastor. And so if you don't want to become a pastor of Christians, do not plant a church, right? I mean, I think that's fair to say.
It seems so simple, but it's most of the literature actually encourages what you just said that's out there, which I guess I shouldn't say most. I don't know exactly.
A lot of it does.
But a lot of it does.
Yeah.
A lot of it does. And one of the things I remember telling people is, like, we kind of felt that way when we first started the well. But we quickly learned that wasn't good. I mean, it was just kind of obvious. And one of the things that we noticed when we planted the well was there was a fair amount of Christians moving into the area, and they're looking for a good church. That is a good thing for somebody who moves into an area and they're looking for a good church to come to your church.
Right.
And so there are locations, I would say, even in the United States, where we refer to them early on as kind of homeless Christians. Maybe it was a small town that just that doesn't have a lot of Bible believing churches, and in Boulder we're thankful there are some for sure, but there are some people who are, or whatever that might be, they'd be looking for a church that was explicitly those things, and that's a good thing to give those people a good solid church home. And I always tell people, I'm like, when I'm talking to planters especially, I'm like, if you really want to make disciples, because they all say they want to make disciples, I'm like, you know what you're going to need? You need Christians to do that. If you want to reach people, you're going to need Christians who go to work and live in different neighborhoods and all of these things. And so this kind of weird kind of disdain that people have for having Christians come to their church is actually antithetical to the very thing that they're saying that they want.
It's wild. It's like they're playing some mind game. It would be like starting a business and there's already a customer base that wants to buy your product. And you're like, yeah, but I don't like you guys. I want the people who aren't buying my product. And your sole focus is on what new market segment can we break into? When that may be a legitimate thing you should evaluate. You should want new customers if you're starting a business. But if new customer acquisition and not retention and kind of reaching the people that have a need that you can meet isn't the kind of primary thing in serving those customers that you've got. I mean, this is what my dad always taught me in business. Like, it's making sure you keep those good, like, relationships going, because those are going to be people that you build a relationship with over a lifetime. And so, yeah, it's very backwards. So that's kind of it's a way I think I would say we've matured.
Mm-hmm.
Other people may evaluate that differently, but it's a way we've kind of moved a bit from more of a, like, we want to see the lost saved, which we do, again, to more how do we develop good pastors. And that's why we focus on the man and the person in church planning, kind of the spiritual awareness, the personal awareness of themselves and why they want to plant a church. So let's get into the residency that we have in its current iteration, which has, is kind of like we're always kind of evaluating the resources we're using or how we're teaching people. We've used tools that we no longer use in the past, and so that kind of thing. But let's start with the residency and how we structured it. So maybe introduce how the residency is structured and what it looks like.
Yeah, so we basically, people apply online. They come in, we review the application, and it's usually pretty obvious pretty quickly. And to be frank, most of the time we know the person, and we have a relationship with them. And that's always kind of the preferred route, because then you're not just kind of guessing. Excuse me. And so you want that, but once we go, oh man, this is great. We don't even necessarily require them to know like where exactly they're going to go. With like the Longmont, when Philip Woods came in and he was going to be in the residency. When we first started talking, he thought he was going to plant in Boulder. I believe, I hope I'm doing him justice on his own story, but as I remember it, and I was like, just like looking at his personality and knowing the area, I was like, you should take a trip up to Longmont. And that was kind of something that he checked out and ultimately planted in Longmont and is doing a good job up there. So we're kind of helping that. But in the residency, kind of functionally, what we do is you need to be able to evaluate as you go. And so the way I kind of like to describe it for people is that we want to keep our residency dynamic, not static. And so different men are going to require different things. Different churches need different things. And so what that looks like for us is that these guys are going to have these kind of mandatory, what we call off-ramps. So there's basically 4 phases to it. And after each phase, there's just kind of an evaluation phase where we just kind of look at it and go, should we continue with this person in planting a church? Is this a good idea? Is this something we want to do? I think it's important also to say with that in the evaluation period, if we decide that like, hey, we're not going to continue the residency, it's not even necessarily that person shouldn't plant a church or that they shouldn't be a pastor or they're not called or anything like that. We have become very specific on what we want to do, the kinds of churches we want to plant, and so on and so forth. So we might say to a guy at one phase, like, hey, like, it's been great working with you. I think we've gotten you some good tools to work with here, but going on to the next phase with us actually probably wouldn't even serve you that well. And so God bless you. We'll be praying for you, and let's stay in touch and see how we can continue to work together in just good kingdom kind of minded ways as we plant more churches, right?
Yeah, so it's 4 quarters. We both like football, and so maybe that's why we shaped it that way. But basically the first quarter is getting to know that church planter better and asking them to do some personal inventory on their own life and story and why God called them. This is actually a big emphasis in a lot of seminaries and Christian institutions is what is the calling of God upon your life. You'll hear this in more like Baptist circles, like when did God call you to ministry? People are typically looking either for something where you were affirmed, somebody laid hands on you, so to speak, or biblically, and then or they went to seminary or like God divinely spoke to them in a certain way at a certain time. But we try to refine that calling, that sense of calling. That's what you're getting into when, why do you want to plant a church? And we're typically trying to get the why behind what most Christians would say. I want to see the lost saved. I think that's really necessary here. I want to glorify God, all that kind of stuff. We're going, that's all good. But typically what motivates us is that and many other things. So men will plant out of reaction, because you'll see this all the time. It's kind of a running joke in church planting world, is that there'll be a disgruntled youth pastor at a stodgy Baptist church, and then they'll go plant a reaction to that. And so the whole church plant's identity is a reaction that they experience because they didn't like how stodgy the Baptist church was. And so we're trying to surface all of that in that first quarter. That first quarter could take 3 months if the guy's really self-aware. It could take 6 months, hopefully not more than that. If we can't get through it in 6 months, or we still see like he's really not paying attention to what we're seeing, at that point, it's like first quarter's over. God bless you. We love you. We're not saying you can't plant a church, but here's our kind of admonition to you.
Yeah, we're not even necessarily looking to be that authority to say like you can't do this.
Right.
Now, I mean, if there was something really intense,
right,
we'd probably say you shouldn't plant a church.
Right.
My experience generally is if that's the case, that guy's probably going to plant a church no matter what.
True.
And that's sad.
That is sad.
You know, but yeah.
The next quarter is more like theological training. So there's specific books we recommend. We recently redid that list just because I don't think we've updated it in 6 years. And so we updated it with some, we want them to have the basics of theology. If they haven't gone to seminary, that's going to require them to do much more theological reading. So that quarter could take 6 months to a year. And so we want to know that if they're going to put like, not that they want to do this necessarily, but like it's a credentialing mechanism. And so let's say you want to put it on LinkedIn that you completed the church plant residency. We want to know if that person is out there publicly saying, yes, I was trained by the Well Church Boulder. We want them to be proud of it, us to be proud of it. And we want that to signal that means that they're going to be trained in certain understandings of soteriology, so it's going to be Calvinistic. If they're not Calvinistic, at that point, we'd probably ask them to exit or tell them that they're exiting after the second quarter. We'd want to focus on what has historically, not really historically for the last 40 years, has been called complementarianism or kind of like understanding male headship and patriarchy and that kind of stuff. And so that church planter that puts that on there, that's going to be kind of an understanding of how they approach the world generally. They may have a different emphasis. And obviously we have emphasized that differently as of late. And so we during that, my point is during that season, we're going to be making sure there's alignment there. Yep. And we're trying to provide training and reading. And what we're not trying to do, I think one of the things that's unique to us, we're not trying to give you like here's how to be a good, like, this is what it means to be a good pastor. You believe these things. That is true in some ways, but we want to develop a kind of lifelong hunger for God and theology and understanding who God is and how he saves and who people are, so that it's not just like checking a box, like I did the reading, I wrote a paper, so now I believe everything y'all believe. It's like, no, we want to actually, like, we want it to be in your bones. Like, these are my convictions. We want the church planter to own it himself. Yeah,
definitely. And I mean, that phase is really important, and because we're covering things in there like preaching as well. So, you know, it comes down to, when we look at it in each phase, is the Bible is pretty clear on what a pastor and an elder is and the qualifications. And so we're kind of actually putting that into practice a little bit before they have to lead a whole bunch of people. So we're seeing all of that. Are they able to teach? These sorts of things. And usually at some point we give that man an opportunity to preach in our church once we believe that he is a qualified pastor, and all of those sorts of things. And so we're looking for a lot of those things, trying to help them out. And then that kind of leads into, so we use the exit ramp there, and we're like, man, everything's great. Let's go on. And then we kind of get into the next phase, which definitely takes a turn towards the nuts and bolts, which is, how it's always funny when you talk to church planners about this, because there's so many different strategies out there and so many of them are very silly. But it's just kind of like, what I found is in this phase, you're going, how is anybody going to know you're there? Where are you going to meet? What's it going to look like? What's your Sunday services? What's your liturgy? Those sorts of things. And it's funny, you get kind of a couple of camps of guys. You get the guys who will be like, how's anybody going to know you're there? And they're like, I'm going to put a sign up in front of the school on Sunday morning that we're meeting at. I'm like, okay. And that's it. Right. I'm like, okay, we need some work there. And then on the other end, you'll have a guy who's like, he's got a whole entire marketing campaign, and it's like, his Google ad spend is more than what you and I make combined in a year.
Right.
And that's actually true in some churches. We've seen that, which is pretty wild to me. And it's just like, everybody's going to know that I'm here. And I'm not, the point of this episode isn't to like pick on people, but it's helping them find out what's a reasonable way to go about it. And so one of the things that we'll do in that phase is actually we kind of have these core leadership values for our staff, and one of them is appropriate excellence. And so we spend a lot of time in there talking to them about what that means. And basically that's just saying like, hey, like if you want to go, like worship's an easy one to kind of pick on it when you speak on that, where it's like the idea is like a lot of them think they're going to go into like a place like Boulder, and if they have a huge band and lots of lights and stuff, that people are going to come there, and then they have like 9 people, but you have a 10-person worship band. That we would call that inappropriate excellence. Right. Now, some might even say having that kind of worship is just is not excellent at all.
Sure.
But that's not the point of today. But what we see there is we're trying to show like, hey, how do you like if you're just gonna be sing psalms and hymns, that's great, do that, and like, but how do you do that excellently?
Right.
Like how is it something that's honoring to God? And that's what we mean when we say excellent. It's not production value. And so we're helping them kind of understand those things. What does that look like for you? Where you're going? We don't even like we're not even that hardcore on contextualization anymore.
Right.
You know, everybody wants, that was the hot thing when we started, is like, how do you contextualize to your culture? Do you dress like them? It's like this kind of missionary thing. We're like, no, I think, you know, you can probably just be exactly who you are. Mm-hmm. And if God's called you and you are faithful to his word and you have some creative things of how you reach your community and how Christians find you, that's all great. Let's help you put all that together into something that's cohesive. We're also doing funding, and that's a huge part.
Yeah, creating a fundraising plan, because most church plants, at least from what I understand and from our experience, most church plants fail for 2 reasons. One, well, first of all, the failure rate in church planting is like 90%, I think. Yeah. Like across the board. That's not just a Boulder thing. That's like across the board. But the reason they fail is because of a lack of funding, which typically either comes from outside funding or people internally, right? They never got enough people internally to become disciples at their church, members of their church, givers at their church, that kind of thing. We were blessed really early on that we had a lot of faithful Christians that joined our church, and we were able to reach self-sufficiency, meaning we didn't rely on outside support as of year 3 of our church plant. But funding is one, and then leadership. One thing that we want to emphasize in our residency is that from quarter 2 to quarter 3, those are actually deeply connected, because your theological convictions about what the church is, what God requires, will shape your ministry plan, your kind of approach to ministry. It's the middleware. Theology is not the middleware, but the plan is the middleware between like you're preaching the actual actions of church planning and then the theology that's informing that. And we want that to be a conscious thing, not a subconscious thing.
Yeah, and I think in these phases, like those 2 phases, we're also kind of like doing an inventory of an awareness of the culture in which you're going into and the culture that you're bringing into there. So like we've seen in our church, and it's well known and people know that we have our kind of biblical orthodoxy that we have, and our desire to be historical and all these things. It's going to cause some tension, right? So that's going to be theological. That's going to be in quarter 2. But then how's that playing out? Like, what do you do when somebody tries to cancel you?
Right.
Right. Like, how do you handle this stuff? Are you resilient? And that goes back to quarter 1. So that's why I said it's dynamic. It's not static. And
Correct.
I know a lot of people want to think of it as very linear, like boom, boom, boom. And it is, because you have to have a process. But in there, we're trying to help guys really get equipped. And in that nuts and bolts, it's kind of taking the first 2, and it's just building off each other as you kind of go forward into it.
Yeah, so the outcome of quarter 3 is typically like a 1,000-day plan. What's it going to look like? We're going into the practical things. Are you going to join a denomination? Which denomination? Why? Are you going to be bivocational? Because we've planted a bivocational pastor. We've planted non-bivocational, just he's a church planter. And so all that's getting worked out in quarter 3. At the end of quarter 3, once we get the 1,000-day plan and that kind of stuff, the church planter has the option. Would you like to be part of kind of the Well Collaborative, which is our church planting network, where we we partner on shared resources so that church planners can get off the ground better. So what this looks like in Q4 is kind of an evaluation of like, do we want to like do a partnership with you? It's not a franchise because we don't necessarily get a cut or anything like that. But it's like when a church starts, a lot of people think like very idealistically about what actually goes on in a church. And a lot of the church needs administration, organization, scheduling, that kind of stuff, booking a space to rent, all that. And with the collaborative opportunity, the opportunity is to take all the kind of like stuff that a church planner typically is not gifted at, the admin stuff, and starting a website even, like, you know, and we've joked about this, like if I were to ever plant a church again, it would just be like a splash page with like, we worship here, join us.
Chase would have like a picture of a cross, and it would be like 9:30 and maybe the address.
But like a good website is like a good front door, and so if you join the Well Collaborative, it would be like we would help you start that website, and we would actually help pay the cost for that. And then when you sign up with the Well Collaborative, you're paying into that a proportion of your church budget, and that's what we would go over in Q3 as well, is what would a church budget look like? I think a lot of church planners get out over their skis and knowing the cost it's going to take. You're going to have to like not make as much money unless you're a great fundraiser. Then like we have to determine how much should you make as a church planner, and what's appropriate for you.
Well, like what's even helpful there, I think it's important just, you know, pointing this out, is like they're like a lot of church planners, they like metrics when they're positive, and so we have to kind of help them look at, hey, some things may not be good. So like the budget compared to people that they have, it's like, okay, so if you're planting with some network, how long is that funding coming that they're giving to you? And so a lot of guys, they go big because they get this money from this big international network, you know, and they've got a bunch of money coming their way. And so they're like paying themselves, and they've got a bunch of staff, and they've got all these things going on. It's like, hey, and we just like lay out, like, if you do this, this means the average like per capita giving in your church needs to be this at this many people.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh.
Yeah.
It's like, are you sure you want to do that?
Right. Because we had one guy that was like, I just want to be a 100-person church. And he wanted to make a reasonable salary. It wasn't exorbitant or anything. And we were like, yeah, but if you have only that many people, you may be able to make that, but you'll barely be able to pay for a facility. And then like your wife is going to run the kids ministry for the rest of her life. Because she
doesn't even want to
she doesn't want to do that.
And you don't want her to do that.
So like,
it's like you're putting yourself in a weird spot.
Yeah, it needs to be appropriate. And it's very much like a business plan. Like, how are you going to attract... sorry, we're speaking in business language. I think you know our hearts in this. But like with a new business, it's going to be how are you going to attract new customers? What's the product you're offering? What's the kind of conversion rate? All that kind of stuff. It's a similar concept in church planning. Even if we know that it's a work of God, it's a work of the Spirit, all that kind of stuff. Just having some basic understandings of how budgets work. A lot of people who graduate seminary have never had to deal with that. And if they have, it's been very peripheral, like they're a youth pastor in this, so they manage the youth budget. But it hasn't been setting a budget. And so then, like I said, Q4 is evaluating the partnership. A lot of that is based on temperament, on if we want to partner together. It's based on like really, I mean, like this sounds super lame, but it's like we're basing it on like, do we like each other enough to like go in together with like partnering on these shared resources? Do you want the shared resources we offer? We use these services for accounting, bookkeeping, for our website, for giving. This is how our rhythms work at our church. And then we'll even go into like sharing, like we're doing a sermon series on 1 Samuel right now. And so how high level do you want to be aligned? Do you also want to preach through 1 Samuel? Because then you could preach at our church, we could preach at your church.
Yeah, it's a big thing because a lot of guys don't have somebody.
Yeah, they're
out of the gate. It's like, so I guess you're preaching 52 weeks a year now,
which is fine if that's like what God has called you to do. Go for it. But like sometimes you need a break.
Yeah, you need a break. You know, it's like no vacation for a long time. But to be straight, if you want to go on vacations, often don't plant a church.
Yeah,
it's not. It's super lucrative.
It's not lucrative at all.
But yeah, so we're helping guys kind of figure all that out, the partnership, the alignment, and in there, I think you're exactly right. It's like, do we like each other? Do we enjoy being with each other?
And it's not easy to work with.
Yeah, and it's not even that like there's guys who maybe don't join the collaborative that it doesn't mean we don't like them, but it's just kind of like, man, it really feels like we're doing the same thing here. And it can be really helpful. I'd even say, like, it's important to know, I've said the residency is dynamic with the planter. It's also dynamic with us in the sense of every new iteration of it, because we learn on how to do it, where it's like the few times we did it, I think it was kind of like figuring it out as you go. Like when you say shared resources, what does that look like? How do bank accounts work? There's a lot of moving parts in there that we had to learn some hard lessons on how to do that better, to make it work for both parties in a really good way. And so I think now going forward after, almost, you said 10 years of doing the residency, but longer of being in church world for both of us, we've learned a lot of lessons on how to do that well. And it's one of those things now that I'm just like, it's really fun. And I think it's appropriate to say this. We can edit it, I guess, if it's not.
Sure.
But I know one of our dreams for our residency in the Well Collaborative would be someday for it to become its own kind of entity, and it grows to a point where it's funded by a lot of churches, and there's an executive director who's in charge of it, and it has a lot of just force and energy behind it, where guys would really desire to be in it, and it could become something that really helps shape the church planting scene, particularly here in Colorado.
Yeah, the ideal would be we would have the funding that God could provide to pay the church planter as he's going through the residency, because, if you're coming out of a vocation that's not in the church and not in ministry, even if you're leaving your church to start a residency and you're not paying, you're going to have to make ends meet and provide for your family. And so ideally we're able to not only pay them, but then bless them. And so that would be the ideal scenario. But yeah, I think we should get into kind of closing out. Who's a good candidate for our residency?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say, a lot of guys will run to age. I'm not too concerned about age usually. And then a lot of guys talk about seminary. Well, I think seminary can be good. You and I aren't as high on all seminaries, depending on the seminary that you've gone to, we have some questions
right.
For that. But, generally I would say church planting is for younger men. It's an exhausting task. It is. Now, I'm not saying an older man can't do it. It's just usually those guys are more in the revitalization, because I think revitalization takes a lot of wisdom. Not that church planting doesn't. It just there's a level of patience that comes with revitalization that a lot of church planters don't have. And so, in the kind of business thing, there's this idea out there of that you have to be entrepreneurial. I think there's some truth to that. I think we harp on that maybe a little bit too much. So I'm looking for a man who has been a member of a church, who has served his church faithfully, who is studying the Word, has an ability to teach. And to be quite frank, what I've seen over the years is he does have to be a leader to do this. And people are like, well, how do you define that? And it's like, the funny thing about guys who are good leaders is they're already leading before they get a title.
Right.
They don't need a title and then they start to lead. Right? That's not how that works. If there's a vacuum of leadership in a space, particularly in the church, they tend to step in and want to be somebody that can provide clarity and support into those areas. And so looking at all the biblical qualifications, of course, that are there, an idea of where they want to go and what the church is going to look like. So I don't want to just build from nothing
right.
with a guy.
Yeah. I think for me, what we're looking at too is like, do you match kind of like who we are?
Yes.
Now, it's not a moving target, but it's been a fun journey, and I do mean fun. It's been challenging, but like when you're pastors like us who are willing to be honest about ways either we've like changed our mind or like matured and trying to develop our own like approach to ministry, that kind of thing. That's unique, a unique thing we offer, and it's a unique thing about us. And if you look at our church and you're like, I would like to be like your church, you're a good candidate for our church plant residency. If you are like, you admire and are inspired by the work we've done at the Well Church, you would like to do something similar, you're a good candidate. And we will take people from different denominational backgrounds, whether it's non-denominational, Baptist, Presbyterian, and we'll help you plant. So this is not necessarily, I'm happy to be, if NAM wants to buy us out, or, NAM wants to offer us the position of taking over their Send network, and, then we plant all their churches. I'd be glad for that. We'll plant Southern Baptist churches.
Yes.
That's not the reality for us. We're just like, we want to see lots of good gospel preaching churches in the state of Colorado. And so ultimately we'd like to see lots of churches, because we know that the way God often works in culture and the way God often works in nations is that he inspires Christians, builds up Christians in churches. We see God save more people. And once a kind of location has like a population that's very aligned, very unified in Christ, and that reaches a certain threshold, it kind of like reaches over a precipice point where they start to gain more influence over, how people are raised, how we raise families well, how even governance works, all that kind of stuff. And so we'd like to see a lot more churches planted in Colorado. There are a lot of good churches in Colorado. There are several good churches in Boulder. There are many good churches in Boulder County. But we'd like to see more, because there's a huge, especially in Denver, but in Boulder specifically, there is a huge unreached, and whether you want to call them de-churched or whatever, there's a huge opportunity to reach people with the gospel. So early in the episode, I kind of downplay the evangelism, but it is a unique opportunity to reach new people. I think, like I said, it gets dangerous when you're trying to like differentiate yourself too much. Like, we're the cool church in town, or like, we're not like those fuddy churches, like whatever. And it's like, no, that's not the emphasis. We want to worship the living God. And you may have a distinctive about yourself that is different than the church down the road. That's fine. Yeah. But that's not what we want to really emphasize as much. But it's really important. So if you're a guy who's finishing seminary or part of a church and you're looking to start a new church, we'd love to talk with you about that. You can go to, I think it's theweldchurches.com.
Yes.
We should probably know that. Obviously, we're big shots and we have it all dialed in. No, but you can apply. Just reach out to us. You can also email the info account, info@boulderwell.org. We'd love to hear from you. We get applications, a few applications every year. So when you think of us like more like a boutique, which sounds kind of feminine. It's not, but more like an offering for a church plant residency that's highly selective and very specific. And so that's what we're offering to people. It's not this kind of cookie cutter. Yeah. You're going to be, Matt 2.0 somewhere else. That is not at all what we're trying to do. We're trying to be good ministries who raise up other ministers to proclaim the gospel.
Yeah, one thing I would add on the kind of profile of the person, it's funny what the modern church planting movement has done is it's almost always been that if you want to plant a church, it's like you go find this other thing. Now obviously, we're taking people in from all sorts of places, but I think if pastors listen to this, I think it's important for us to be thinking about, are we raising up the type of men that we'd want to plant in our own churches? Because historically, that's how it was done. Right. And so for our own church, it's a hope that someday we'll have a man that, it'd be really cool if there was a man who became a Christian in our church, and we discipled him for years, and then he had a calling put on his life, and he planted another church out of that. I think that's honestly the ideal what way to go about it. It's not that the other ways are bad, but it's just I think pastors need to be thinking about the men in their church is like, are there good men that carry these giftings that feel called to do this, and how am I cultivating and helping them? And I think a lot of people go, man, if you're doing all this work, aren't you taking care of your people? And I'm like, yes, I'm trying to cultivate church planters in our own church through how we disciple, through very normal churchman sort of actions in life, and assessing those. And we've had conversations with guys in our own church and people even considering going into ministry things. And sometimes you can think about it like, should I go do this ministry? And it's like, no, maybe you should go do a job. We've had those conversations with people, but I think it's really important if you're going to be about church planting, which I think is good, that in your own church, are you looking at your own men that are there, and are the men in your church aware of these sorts of things? And that's one of the reasons we want to do this podcast, is so that our church has a better understanding of what we're doing.
Yeah, and just to provide some more context on that, like Well, we're not. I think when Christians hear this kind of stuff, they will typically go like, "Oh, so we want every guy to plant a church." It's like, no.
No.
we're saying the door is open. That opportunity is available here at our church, and we'd love to see that happen. I think it's a beautiful thing, like Matt said. But we also want to provide lots of training for guys who, are not interested in ministry.
For sure.
Just want to be good churchmen. So.
Yeah, you don't want to force it.
No.
Forcing somebody into church planting is a bad idea.
Well, and then you get a whole culture, like early on when we planted. I remember early on we were like 50 people, and like we had a guy who was younger, and he's a good guy, but he was like, I'm a church planter. I'm going to plant a church. I want y'all to train me how to plant a church. And we were like, okay, we just met like 6 months ago, and like I don't know your background, I don't know anything about you, and so like there can be kind of this fervor in different churches, either for missions or for church planting, that kind of thing, for ministry, because we celebrate it, and that's not wrong to celebrate it. It's good, but at the same time, we don't want to diminish the importance of just developing healthy families, healthy men, and a healthy church. So.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good place to end. We could talk all day about church planting. It's something we both love, we've done, have experience in it, and so. Yeah, I think it's very important. I think it's a big part of our church and what we've been. And so it's something that we want to continue doing into the future. And I'm really excited about where we're going with it and all the lessons that we've learned throughout the years. And I think we do have something unique to offer in this kind of space of church planting that can be really helpful for the right guy.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I hope this episode was helpful. Like I said, if you are an aspiring church planter or you're a member of our church and want to have more questions, we'd love to hear from you, info@boulderwell.org. Or if you're a pastor that's listening and you're interested in starting a residency yourself or maybe partnering with us on how to plant more churches in Colorado or elsewhere, we'd love to talk with you as well. We're happy to do that. So thanks for tuning in today, and we'll see you next time.